Welcome to The Download, where we bring you discussion and analysis from a Catholic perspective. Today's Tuesday, July 11, 2023. I'm Brad Eli here with the two co-hosts, Simon Rafe, Christine Niles. And joining us today with spot-on analysis and insightful commentary, Kyle Copey. Hi, Kyle.
Hey, Brad. I'll try to live up to that.
I'm sure you will. The movie, Sound of Freedom. I'm sure some of you viewers out there have already seen it. Certainly, we've all heard about it by now. It's a movie based on a true story about a man who made it his mission to fight the scourge of human trafficking. The movie is wildly successful in the box office, far exceeding expectations. Back on the 4th of July, its release date, the film grossed over $14 million. The film has already grossed $40 million in its opening week. I don't know what to be amazed at more. Tim Ballard, who's the guy that's portrayed in here by James Caviezel, his actual life story, I mean, it's heroic. Or the fact that this little-known company, Angel Studio, puts out this epic movie, kind of like Nefarious came out on an extremely important topic, just a little offbeat studio that puts out something that they should have been mainstreaming for a long time. Lots of things to swirl the head about.
Yeah. Well, I watched it on July 4th, and I got to tell you, it's an incredible film. It really is. And it's not just about child sex trafficking in and of itself. It's just a great action thriller drama. It really is. Just standing alone, even if it were not a true story, it would just be a great action thriller. It's got all the elements of it. Great acting by Jim Caviezel, great acting by everybody. But it just so happens to be based on a true story. And what's interesting about this one, and you don't often get this, is the film itself actually had to downplay real elements from Tim Ballard's life, because if they had included it in there, it would have been too incredible. I mean, seriously, because I've been listening to a lot of interviews with Tim Ballard, who was the founder of Operation Underground Railroad. He has an incredible life. And just to give you an example, I'm not going to give too much away. I'm not going to give any spoilers, but in the film, they do document a real-life rescue of children on an island. And again, they had to downplay the real-life event, because if they had shown the real actual event, they showed a certain number of children saved, but the actual number of children saved were like triple that day, because they actually had three concurrent operations going on in 3 parts of the world. It was called Operation Triple Take, one in Haiti, one in Colombia, and there was another one, where they actually ended up busting 3 different pedophile networks and saving many, many more children, but the film only focused on one. And they also didn't focus on some of the other things that happened afterwards. Again, it's just such an incredible film. And there were parts of the film that I actually thought they, because Hollywood likes to just add things for creative license, and I thought, yeah, that didn't really happen. That didn't happen. They just added it for flair. I don't want to say too much. But it turns out afterwards, watching Tim Ballard, it was true. It was like an incredible thing that happened. I'm like, wow. But I've got to tell you, it's a really difficult film to watch as a parent. It was difficult from the first moment, okay? But they do a really good job of not including too many graphic details. So you can take your teen children to watch it, not the little children, it's too intense, but the teen children can watch it. It is appropriate, because they, like I said, they don't show the horrible parts. But it's so gripping from the first moment to the very end. God's hand is clearly at work in so many things, miracles, and it's so crucial and so important to bring light to what is happening to lots of children around the world. And I'm not talking about like 16-year-olds, okay, which obviously they are being trafficked. I'm talking about very, very young children. I'm talking about newborns and toddlers and 6-year-olds and 7-year-olds. These are the children that are being trafficked in the worst ways.
Christine, you talked about the fact that what was portrayed in the movie was only like a third of the operation that was going on. And from what I understand, Angel Studios plans to put out a documentary that describes the whole story, all 3 of those operations going on, where much more children were saved than it is actually portrayed in the movie. It's all true. We're not saying they made anything up or purposely left anything out. You can only fit so much stuff in a movie, right? You can only focus on one little aspect of it. But it's great that Angel Studios is actually going to come out and tell the entire story of Ballard. And that's just one incident. Even that Operation Triple Take, that's just one thing that Ballard has been involved with throughout his career. I mean, he's a former agent of Homeland Security. Before that, he was set to go into the CIA. And when he entered Homeland Security, they saw something in him, and he describes this as sort of like a divine providence type of thing. They saw something in him, the leadership did, that said, okay, he would be good in tracking these things down. He has an affinity to find these people or whatever. And, they pulled him into the office, the higher-ups at Homeland Security, and they said, look, we want you to do this. We want you to head this unit up to find these children and to interrupt some of these, it's almost like a cartel, to interrupt some of this stuff. And they said that one of the qualities that they recognized in Ballard was that he was a man of faith. And they said that we don't pick people to do this who are not people of faith, because if they're atheists, it'll crush your soul. So he needs that faith in there to counteract the gruesome stuff that he's seen. I mean, he describes, I've as well seen many interviews with him. He describes some of the stuff that he had to sit through in some of the reports he had to write. He had young children at the time. As parents watching that, it was really psychologically hard for him to not superimpose his kids' faces on there and see them being abused, because he would actually have to watch some of this child sexual abuse material, videos of young children, terrible things being done to their bodies. He would have to sit there and watch this stuff, and he had post-traumatic stress disorder from it. He had to go through a lot in terms of recovery, but it's again having that faith that's really, brought him through all that horrific stuff that he had to witness for his job to do the good work that he was doing.
Absolutely, and he was actually inspired by a Haitian man whose son was taken from him from church. He was the pastor. He's a Haitian man who lives in Utah. He pastors a church, and his little 3-year-old boy named Gardy was actually taken in the middle of a church service and taken back to Haiti and then disappeared. So Tim Ballard learned about this, and this man asked for him to help. And so Tim said, okay, we will help. And that's how they actually launched this initial operation in Haiti, to look for little Gardy. That was the name of the boy. And so they spent months, tracking down this pedophile network, and they finally did this, bust. And it was a fake orphanage, and it had popped up right after the big earthquake in Haiti. And so these children were left orphaned, and they were taken off the street, put into a fake orphanage. But it wasn't licensed as an orphanage. And so they suspected, they had drone footage, they found out there were a bunch of children there, more than 24, and they suspected this was a child trafficking operation. And so he walked in with a woman who is an accomplice, another undercover investigator, and they're Americans, okay, and they walk into this Haitian orphanage, didn't say a word at all, and the first thing one of the Haitian guys says is, we're selling children, do you want some? Like right away, $10,000 each, maybe 15, and they're really young. There was a back room where they had newborns just lying in their own feces with bellies distended because they were feeding them a paste of flour and water just to keep them barely alive so that they could sell them. It was horrific. And he's having to play along, and one little boy is following him. He's just a little baby, could barely walk, and he puts his hand up because he has to pretend, who am I going to buy? So this little boy, so he picks him up and is holding him, and then there's a little girl following behind them, staring at him, like giving him a death stare, and calling him blanc, because that means white in French, but very hostile. And so to kind of get her out of the way, because he's trying to save these children without telling anybody, he gives her a candy bar. And almost like muscle memory, she breaks the candy bar and she gives half to the little boy. And that's when he realizes, oh, this is his sister. This is his sister. And she's afraid that I am another trafficker who's going to kidnap and take her brother away from her. And so now he's got both of them together, and he's kind of walking around, and he pretends to buy them. So fast forward, they actually save 28 children. He has to go back. They don't find Gardy, so he has to go back to this father and break this, heartbreaking news that they couldn't find his son, and they're both crying and crying and crying about it. And then, but he says, but we did save 28 children. At that point, the father stops crying. His face lights up, and he's smiling. And then Ballard says, why are you smiling? We couldn't find your son. Why are you smiling? And the father says, don't you understand what happened? If I hadn't told you about my son, none of these other children would have been saved, and they could have gone on to live lives of misery, and then many, many more children. So you saved all these children. And then he said this, he said, if the sacrifice of my son could save these young children, then it's something that I would gladly make. And what's amazing is this man went on to adopt 9 of those children that were rescued. 9. He took them into his home. And that actually inspired Tim Ballard, who already has 7 children, right? He himself adopted those 2 little little brothers. So now they're his children. Yeah.
I think it's very interesting that his organization is called Underground Railroad, because of course the Underground Railroad was during the Civil War and was moving slaves within the United States from the southern states where slavery was permitted and allowed to the free northern states. And obviously this is a question there of slavery. And so when we talk about sex trafficking, it's actually very, very interesting because obviously this is a Hollywood movie, and so it focuses, and as well, shows such as Law and Order SVU, they focus on these issues of often, sex trafficking and the use of children in that manner. But the actual problem of human trafficking is much larger than that narrow thing, which of course people react to very viscerally, as they should. But interestingly, so there's actually the International Labor Organization, which you think, why would they have figures on this? Because this is about slavery. It's about involuntary servitude. It's about people who are engaging in labor that they don't want to engage in. So interestingly, this is an interesting number from 2016. This is the last figures that we have. I don't think things have improved since then. The numbers have probably got worse. But 24.9 million, nearly 25 million people around the world are victims of human trafficking. And about 20 million of those are labor trafficking victims. So what we're actually talking about there is this isn't sexual exploitation. Although certainly these people are probably in a vulnerable situation. They may be exposed to sexual abuse, but that's not why they've been taken. They are existing essentially as modern-day slaves. And we, of course, in America, we react very, very badly to that idea of slavery, because it's like, dude, we had a whole war over this. We tore the country in two. Hundreds of thousands of people fought, thousands of people died, but slavery is still going on. It's still happening. 20 million people here in 2016, and nearly 5 million sex trafficking victims there, with about 4 million being adults and 1 million of them being children. But interestingly, here's the very interesting statistic. When you talk about labor trafficking, it's slightly more skewed towards women. Women are, generally speaking, slightly more likely to be taken as a labor trafficked slave. But when you talk about sex trafficking, it is 99% of them are female. So that is what you were looking at. So this is the situation there, that we're looking at not merely a question of, this is some, horrible abuse of the human person and these are terrible things happening, but this is an extreme example of, a great, gender bias is what we have here, that these women are suffering. This is women are suffering within this sex trafficking and just indeed labor trafficking in general.
Yeah, I can't believe the gravity of these stories that are coming out from these small, non-known movie studios. This one's Angel Studios, and I wanted to read just briefly what they're about. The Angel Studio is a platform, a studio empowering filmmakers to crowdfund, create, and distribute films and TV series globally, backed by thousands of angel investors. And on our media release, they talk about Angel Studios as the home of stories that amplify light. Well, this is actually very dark, but there's a lot of light that's coming out of Tim Ballard's life. A shout out to him. Through its platform, thousands of angel investors choose which titles will be created, funded, and distributed. It really harkens back almost to that movie Nefarious that we just really championed, and it did far better in the studios, just by word of mouth. Extremely important stories that were surrounded by this battle, either on the demonic level or on the worldly human trafficking level. It's also influenced by the demonic. That we all have our own little world of security, and we go home and have our little TV dinner and have our little show and all this type of stuff, while this is all going on in the world around us. And it's these little studios that are starting to tell these stories that are starting to get out there. And people are like, wow, this is what's really going on. A sobering look at the world around us. I don't think you ever go away quite the same after experiencing a movie, like Nefarious was, or this story here that's being told. And the fact that it couldn't tell everything, that's with any good story. I mean, a book, your screenplay can only get so many things. If we're going to do this one screenshot of this one thing, you know, I mean, that's going to take us 5-10 minutes. You got to choose your battles. And so, of course, you only can tell part of the story. The fact that they're going to go in double dip on this one and really actually expand the storyline is amazing to me. But this came out in 2,850 theaters already. And it's just word of mouth, word of mouth, word of mouth, and people's hearts and lives being changed. Quite a movement recently that's taking place in this area.
Well, there's something to be said when you have a topic like human trafficking, sex trafficking, because for most people's daily experience, that's not part of it, right? It's like, you know, well, I don't know anyone who's been this, I don't see it in my neighborhood. So I think for most, you know, suburban American people, they hear something like this and then it's like an undercover thing that's happening behind the scenes, and they question whether it's really happening at all. And, you know, we assure you it is. You're just not seeing it, you're not hearing about it, especially in the mainstream media. You know, they're not getting any coverage for this movie at all. It's smaller outfits who are, you know, sort of banging the drum on this. But when you have a movie like this, that's when you take an seemingly abstract concept like, you know, human trafficking or whatever, no one even understands what that means sometimes, and you particularize it in a certain story, like Ballard's story in particular, this operation that he was involved in, then it kind of brings it home. You're like, okay, this is a real person who's actually investigating this. These are real people who've been recovered, real families who've been restored. And Ballard talks about, and I don't know if they get to this in the movie, but you know, people accuse him of saying, well, you know, these victims aren't going to recover just because the bad guys are in handcuffs. Well, no, Ballards Organization is involved in years and years of therapy for some of these victims to help them recover. And you're never going to be fully whole, right? Yeah. After you experience something like that.
Well, and I think as well, you know, with that, obviously I think it's wonderful, you know, that Ballards Organization is actually, you know, doing the follow-up on that. That's obviously superb. And obviously that's very, very necessary. But the kind of argument of saying, well, these people are never going to be okay after the trauma they've suffered, everything that's gone through, that's kind of akin to saying, like, oh, well, you know, are you going to adopt the kid that you saved from being killed? Well, it's like, you know what? No, I don't have to for stopping him being murdered to be a good thing. You know what? Yes, the individual who has suffered this forced slavery, this individual who has suffered the forced slavery, is never going to be the same again. They have been traumatized. They are in a terrible situation. They are always going to carry the scars with them, physical, mental, spiritual scars for the rest of the time. But you know what? It's not happening to them. They're not being beaten tomorrow. They're not being abused tomorrow. That has been, I think that becomes, there is a tendency sometimes with people to want to make the perfect the enemy of the good in this regard. We see it with regard to the pro-life positions. I think we do see it with regard to these. Well, what kind of life would these children have? Well, they actually have a life. They would have the opportunity to be better. It's got to be better than where they were before. You know, and obviously I think, you know, certainly that's very true. But it is absolutely wonderful that Ballard's doing this, you know, follow-up stuff as well. That's very good too.
Yeah, no, as far as this, you know, what you said about people not really thinking this is happening because they're like, they don't see it. And what Ballard says is, because people ask him, so what do these child traffickers look like? What do they look like? What do pedophiles look like? He said they look like anybody that you can imagine. They're not just like the really horrible, monstrous-looking sort of guys who are sweaty and gross. He said they don't look anything like that. They're normal individuals. They could be judges. They could be politicians. They could be lawyers. They could even be, I was amazed at this, really attractive women who are actually involved in child trafficking. One of the biggest pedophile rings in South America was headed by a woman who used to be, I think, Miss Cartagena in Colombia. She was like a real beauty queen. She was a beauty queen, and yet she was involved in child trafficking. And she was the one who was actually recruiting these kids, promising them great modeling careers, and going from door to door and talking to the parents and convincing them to let them have the children. They would take them off and, you know, make them these beautiful stars. Beautiful woman, and yet here she was recruiting young children to be sold into sex slavery. I'm talking young children, 5, 6, 7 years old. Horrific stuff. So
yeah, so Kyle, also the people are being led down that path to not believe because of left-wing media. their takes on it. You have some statements from them that you want to.
Sure, and they're just adding fuel to the fire of, oh, this is not real, pay no attention to this, it's actually just some right-wing conspiracy theory
Rolling
stuff.
Stone, Guardian.
Yeah, there was an article that was put out by Rolling Stone. The author's name was Miles Klee, I believe. A terrible article. He went and saw the movie and was just making fun of the age of the people in the audience and saying, oh, this is a bunch of white-haired boomers shouting amen, and it's just meant to get them riled up. He had some crazy things to say about this movie. He says this is Miles Klee writing. He says, quote, Ballard, Caviezel, and others of their ilk had primed the public to accept Sound of Freedom as a documentary rather than delusion by fomenting moral panic for years over this grossly exaggerated epidemic of child sex trafficking, much of it funneling people into conspiracy theorist rabbit holes like QAnon community. So that's the whole thing. And
wow,
Ballard has a great FAQ, I believe, on his website. The Operation Underground Railroad, and they address all of these so-called problems. They debunk all of it. All the Wikipedia pages that say he's some like QAnon hero. They go through and they dismantle every single one of them. Ballard even talks about it in interviews. He's like, I've been accused of being a QAnon person and claiming that these celebrities have this cabal of child sex things and they extract certain compounds from the child's body, and he's like, I'm not going anywhere with that. What he has seen, however, is something akin to that. He doesn't have any information about any celebrities doing any of that, but he has seen this firsthand in countries like Africa, where they have these demonic rituals where they sexually abuse the children and then they dismember them and hang their dismembered body parts around their house to ward off the spirits or whatever. It's crazy stuff that he's seen. So it's that kind of stuff that gets taken and misconstrued into him being just being a propped up right-wing conspiracy theorist.
Yeah, exactly. No, that is true, and it really does happen in Africa with the witch doctors. It really does happen. He has seen it. His operators have seen it. They try to rescue these children, and it is so prevalent in certain countries in Africa that they actually have had to pass child sacrifice laws in certain countries in Africa because this superstition of, oh, if we take this child and dismember it and do various rituals with the witch doctors, we will get health and well-being. And so these little children are kidnapped off the street, their blood is taken, all of this. So this is happening, but they're trying to link him to this like QAnon stuff. And it got me so angry. I have to tell you, I was so angry when I saw the Miles Klee article. Rolling Stone also had one by Charles, that was Rolling Stone, but Charles Bramesco for The Guardian, Jezebel, Washington Post. They're all trying to dismiss this as some QAnon adjacent film. And the question I have is, for one, the film is totally apolitical. I mean, not political at all. It's literally about a true story. It's a true story of the rescue of the brother and sister and other children. And my question is, why are you running cover for pedophiles? And I'm really glad too, because Miles Klee and this other guy, they were absolutely blasted on Twitter. You should have seen the ratio of all these people saying, "Okay, groomer, why are you protecting pedophiles?" He actually had to make his account protected because he got so much backlash.
But I think it's obviously when you come along, you say this is a great exaggeration of the situation. It's like, well, okay, firstly, what constitutes a great exaggeration? I mean, how many victims is Ballard, is the movie, is Ballard, is Jim Caviezel, are they coming out and saying they are? And when I've got a number of 25 million around the world, okay, 25 million out of a population of 8 billion people, that is fortunately not particularly high. Okay, it is about 25 million too many. I mean, and that is where it comes from. How many people have to be sold into slavery of sexual kind or non-sexual kind? How many people have to be sold into slavery before it's a problem? How many people? And you know what? There is one of my favorite books, Starship Troopers, which is an excellent book, and in there it has the question of, do you go to war for 10,000 prisoners of war who are being kept behind? Yes, absolutely is the answer. Do you go to war for 1,000? And where's the limit? And our hero, Johnny Rico, says it doesn't matter if it's 1 or 1 million, you fight. And it's like, okay, this is why you're not a politician, Johnny, but you are a soldier and that's what you do, and I get it. And it's like, okay, if there's 1 slave victim. There's one slave, fine. You know what? That's people like Ballard will go out and will try to deal with this and do this. Also, again, when you look at this and you say, well, this is, you know, exaggerating this situation of like child sex abuse. Okay, we're not talking about child sex abuse. We're talking about human trafficking, which includes child sex abuse. And I think that's like a key thing, that this isn't a question of saying, well, this child sex abuse is not happening in my town where I can see it, so it's not happening here. It's like, okay, how many people working on Park Avenue and, you know, as the domestic help, how many of those are human trafficked? How many of those are in fact modern day slaves? And there's probably a fair number of them. This figure here, for like nearly 5 million sex trafficking victims, it's actually like this category includes any adults who involuntarily participate in the sex industry. Okay. You go to some of these women who are participating in the sex industry and you ask, is this involuntary? And they will say it is not. I have chosen to do this. Was that really an informed choice? Is that an informed choice that you have made? Is this number of 5 million sex trafficking victims in fact larger when you've got pressures from pornography, when you've got pressures from women who've got into the modeling industry, and when you've got pressures like, you know, the starry-eyed girl from Kansas who gets off the bus in Los Angeles and wants to go into Hollywood, and she ends up essentially in what is semi-respectable prostitution involved in some sort of sex industry or something like that. She may say that she's voluntarily participating because that's kind of a lie that she tells herself. I think these numbers are way too small on that regard. And again, it's that whole issue of people wanting to take away the dignity of other human beings and use them for sex, use them for labor, use them to be their domestic help. Well, that's where it goes on.
I mean, so much of this is unknown, so much is undocumented. I couldn't imagine it being anywhere close to, you know, you don't have all the numbers at all by any means. But I was going to mention with Christine, you had Forward Boldly come out like a week before this all came out, which was really focusing on child trafficking in America.
Yes, and I was actually just yesterday, because a friend of mine shared my interview with Lee Rhodus, who was a very courageous whistleblower who testified before a congressional committee, that she was a volunteer with the HHS Unaccompanied Children's Program. Very well-meaning woman, good Christian woman who just wanted to help children. That's all she wanted to do. And she said, I was shocked. I was shocked by the sponsors who were unvetted, okay? We were not vetting these sponsors. All they had to show was, you know, fill out a form, basically, and show some sort of relationship with the child. Many times they could be forged documents. And I found 4 violations where children were being placed with these families, and the families are literally pimping them out for sex, and it turns out they're not the family at all. They're members of a crime syndicate, or people falsely, you know, one lady said she was the aunt of a teenage girl. They go interview the girl. Project Veritas actually did an undercover sting where they interviewed the girl, and the girl said, I've never seen her before in my life. She claims she's my aunt, but then she says, I have to go sleep with these women and men multiple times a day, and then she gets the money for it. So she finally ran away. And so horrible things are happening.
And this is all just on our own border, southern border.
Right here, yes. This is right here in California.
Kids coming across.
She was helping to place children in families.
These same programs that the bishops are not even asking any questions about.
Catholic Charities is involved. And so she went to report this to HHS, thinking naively, of course the government doesn't want this happening. Of course they're going to. And she was the one retaliating against. She got kicked out of the program completely. And I said, why? Why would they retaliate against you? She said, it is a multi-billion-dollar industry. It is all about money. There's so much money happening. Federal taxpayer dollars are going into these immigrant programs, and for each child they bring across, they get a certain number of dollars, and each family that they get placed a certain number of dollars. It's multi-billion-dollar a year industry. But I got called QAnon for posting this interview, and I'm like, I don't even know what QAnon is. Like, I've never looked into QAnon in my life. Then they also call me MAGA. I'm like, I'm not MAGA either. You know, it's like I'm very critical of Trump.
Forward Boldly on QAnon sometime.
I know, seriously. So I'm just like, okay, it's such a bizarre response to me, because it's like, okay, even if you think some of the child trafficking numbers are a little inflated, you should just be grateful that there's a movie out there that's bringing light to the horrors of child trafficking, whether it's, you know, 1,000 or 1 million, whatever it is, you just be grateful that light's being brought to this and public awareness and more people can help out with this. So the way I think about it is, why are you running cover for pedophiles? Why? You know, like maybe people should start checking your hard drive. I don't know.
Well, the whole Jeffrey Epstein thing and his list of customers, right? Supposedly involves senators and all sorts of high, judges and everything.
Yeah.
So where is that list? Why don't we have that? Everything's leaked. Right? Why don't we have that leaked?
Yeah.
Out
well,
there?
I see, and this is
when you
the
have
problem.
all those high-ranking leaders out there, that's why you're not getting anything done, because it's like mutual destruction if we actually move on this.
Yeah, you see, this is the problem, that the list that you have that's out there, and there's been various lists that have been leaked, and none of them have been confirmed to actually be Jeffrey Epstein's list. And of course, there was a whole business back in the 2016 election, if you remember. This was the pizza parlor in Washington D.C. that was allegedly this hub of whatever it was. And of course, nothing was ever proven. And this was kind of this is the QAnon thing, and this is where they're going with it, because this was never proven. And to be perfectly honest with you, a lot of the stuff that floated around and was passed around, it was like so clearly ridiculous, and it was like self-contradictory, and there was all these things. So it's like, okay, so that, it's very easy to point to some clearly ridiculous element of the QAnon story and go, okay, well, that is about human trafficking. Therefore, everything about human trafficking is ridiculous. And it's like, you know what? It really isn't. It's not absolutely, that not everything is on the same level as that sort of ridiculousness. Just like, we saw January 6th, okay? So you saw January 6th, and you saw that, crazy dude who had his horned helmet, and he's got these, like, ridiculous furry pants, and he's rampaging around. He's the QAnon shaman or whatever. Okay, that guy, clearly, not a serious man concerned with political issues. He's clearly, okay, you are there for entertainment, and I get that. But you know what? There were a whole bunch of other people there who had legitimate concerns and legitimate queries, but all of the energy, all the attention is directed on that. And so that's why they're calling you QAnon, because they haven't looked into the issues. They're just going, oh, well, okay, the moment you mention this human trafficking. And as well, I think there's probably a fair number of these people. I wouldn't go so far as to say we should start checking your hard drive for, illegal, child sex abuse material and stuff. But it's entirely possible that you're on Park Avenue and you've got an undocumented worker that you really don't pay very much, or somebody does that, or you go to the parties where those happens. That's the wider issue. Again, 5 million sex trafficking victims, 20 million slaves.
Yeah, and that includes little children being exploited for labor as well.
Yeah.
That's something Tara also brought up during the interview. She said that she knew of a case where a 6-year-old was essentially being placed with not a sponsor who claimed to be the uncle, wasn't really the uncle, and he just used the 6-year-old for labor all day long, I think picking tomatoes. Literally paid him $2 a day to work a full day. 6-year-old. These were one of the abuses, but this is happening all over the place.
Yeah.
So
I can't believe the bishops themselves never, ever, 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 ever acknowledged the possibility that the massive hordes coming across the border with cartels backing all of that somehow is not aiding and abetting the whole child or just human trafficking. They just don't bring it up. They never talk about it. The knockoff effect, they're just like, open borders, bring more people in, let them all come. It's like, do you understand what, you can't vet everybody. You don't have enough resources to go ahead and follow up all the paperwork on everything. And to just add fuel to the fire and have an open border here without any consideration whatsoever about the whole element of human trafficking coming along with all of that is completely irresponsible on behalf of the bishops.
just a true story that Ballard shared. I think he was with President Trump at the time, just to give an example of just how this open borders policy absolutely facilitates child trafficking. There was a real rescue that his team did of a girl who was, I think when they found her, she was 16, I believe. They found her in New York, and it was 24 hours before she actually spoke. She was just so in shock because she'd been doing this now, I think, for either 6 to 8 years, she said. From a very young, they stole her, essentially, from South America. And she said, we just walked right across the border. Just walked, literally just walked right across the border. Nobody stopped us, nothing, there was no wall. They brought me to New York, and they made me, starting with a very, very young age, it was under 10, she had to sleep with like 10 men a day for the next 9 years or something like that. And so they estimated that she was raped probably about 60,000 times over her entire life. And they had caught her, they found her when she was like 16 or 18 or so. And she said that for the first time in my life, I feel hope. But this is just one example that he gave of child trafficking, just people being smuggled, literally walking across the border, and that's why he and his organization so strongly support the wall.
Well, yes, and I think that's kind of the point that you brought up, Brad, and as well, you say there, Christine. Obviously, we talk about the wall, and it's like, okay, we're not necessarily talking about let's build a physical wall. Let's just have some kind of policy whereby we don't have open borders. So we have a wall, we have a moat, we have a fence, we have guards, we have whatever. We have just like not an open border policy because you're obviously talking about the vast majority of people coming to this country illegally are coming across the southern border. They're coming across the border between Mexico and the United States there. And they're coming from South America, but they're also coming from other places. They're coming into South American countries from elsewhere in the world and coming over the border. If you look on a map, that border, very long, also goes through an awful lot of desert, which is really inhospitable, and people die. It's not just a question of people casually walk across the border like you're crossing the street. People die in the desert because it is brutal and it is horrible and it is absolutely awful. The coyotes, which is the name given to the cartel and other criminal elements who help people get across the southern border, those people, the coyotes, will take a huge sum of money from these people to get them to the United States. If they don't have that huge sum of money, they become essentially in a form of indentured servitude, a debt slavery to these people. So now that these people who've come to the country illegally, maybe they get killed crossing the border because it's extraordinarily dangerous. They have to work in essentially slavery to pay back the cartels. You owe money to dangerous criminals. People coming from the Far East, they have similar kind of people who come in from China as well as one example. They call those people, they're not coyotes, they call them snakeheads. And again, they are connected with the Far Eastern gangs who are, again, these horrible, brutal people. You cross these people, you say, well, whoa, hey, I don't want to do this thing that you want to do. They say, okay, well, you can work off your debt to us by engaging in sex work or something. Well, I don't want to do that. Okay, we kill you because we're the cartels and we don't care what happens to you. They are dealing, as you say, Christine, with billions and billions of dollars, and these are not nice people. Now, the fact that there isn't some sort of effective border there, suddenly the cartels are like, oh, well, we can do this. This is a thing that we can do. If it was said there is a border there and people were like, well, you can't really cross, I don't see how you could achieve it, people would not be trying to buy this from the snakeheads. They wouldn't be buying it from the coyotes. This is the thing. I put this right at the foot of the U.S. government and, as you said, Brad, the bishops. They're the ones with the open border.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned it yesterday. Tim Ballard says that they're doing their very best to stop the facilitation of child trafficking into the U.S. because the U.S. is the biggest consumer of child sex abuse material in the world. In the world, we are the biggest consumer. And he says, we have our teams down in South America, Central America, trying to stop it from coming up here. But he likened it to chopsticks, trying to catch flies with chopsticks. He said, if we just had this wall or this border, some sort of border control, it's like a huge fly swatter that would get so many of them. But right now, it's just, yeah. But I've spoken to Texas residents who said the media will not cover this, but you've got Texas ranchers who have miles of their ranches, along the border, and they will routinely come across corpses on their own ranches because they're trying to cross, and as you said, it's very inhospitable. People die, and so they will routinely come across these corpses on their land.
Kyle?
Yeah, that kind of strikes home to me because we talk about the U.S. bishops sort of incentivizing this when they get government money to ultimately facilitate this furthering on, these people being brought over because of this immigration program promoted by the U.S. hierarchy. It's not only promoted by the bishops, because the educational institution which I taught at, that particular religious order would have these different retreats that teachers could go on every year. I never went on this particular one, but some of my colleagues did. But they essentially, and in this particular religious order, I won't say their name, but they're basically the Jesuits Junior. So you can tell their social justice leanings there. They would bring teachers down to the border and they would also incentivize illegal border crossings. How? Well, they would leave water for them. You know, we talked about how brutal it is to cross the border. Obviously, people need water, and it seems like a very humanitarian effort to do. But now these people know that there's free water on the way, so they're like, well, if I was having any qualms about crossing the border before, now I know that there's certain Americans out there, certain religious orders that are employing their teachers to go out there and leave jugs of water for these people and making a easier trail for them to illegally enter this country.
Yeah, no, we have a event coming up. You want to talk about?
Well, yeah, I was going to say, Brad.
Calling out the bishops for their willful blindness, you might say, being their paid silence, I guess.
Yeah, so obviously the United States bishops they get a lot of money from the United States government to do various activities. And one of those things they do is they do a lot of stuff with regard to immigration and indeed, with regard to, placing of children with people and all of this sort of stuff. So they receive a large amount of money from the United States government. And on paper, you think, oh, well, that's good, that they can receive this money and that they could use this money for good things. The problem is, as we've discussed, the United States bishops are endorsing open immigration without any consideration of what it's doing to forget what it's doing to the country. Obviously, that's kind of a serious issue. But what is it doing to the poor schmucks who are going with the coyotes across the border? Those people are dying. Those people
caught up with.
Exactly. Yeah, those people are being sold into some kind of slavery, and this is happening here. The bishops are doing this. So what we have is our Deposit of Faith event, which is happening on the 20th of July. This month as is. It's like in just over a week. Gosh, still got a lot of organizing to do. So we've got this thing that is happening. First, there is going to be a prayer protest outside the USCCB headquarters in Washington, D.C. So this is at the Capitol. And then after that, there is going to be a press conference. So there's going to be a press conference, and we're going to invite all of the press. We're going to invite everyone, from Fox News and AP and CNN and CBS and all of these people.
Not just QAnon.
Not just QAnon. I mean, look, if QAnon wants to turn up with his ridiculous hat, it's fine. I will hand him a press kit. It's not a problem. Press kit, donut, have fun, strange horn dude. But obviously what we're wanting to do, because we're saying, look, the bishops have engaged in anti-American behavior. Yes, we know that it's anti-Catholic, but it is anti-American using taxpayer dollars. That is kind of the key point. Catholics, obviously, very concerned about anti-Catholic behavior. Americans in general will be concerned about anti-American behavior. And we're looking at issues such as the immigration issue. We're looking at crime. We're looking at the whole climate change thing that they're promoting, this false narrative on climate change, which is going to have very real implications economically to America. And it's also going to have very real implications for the security of America when America is placed in these positions. And we're talking about crime as well. This is happening with regard to the illegal immigration. These things are anti-American, and that is the key issue. So what we're wanting to say is, look, the U.S. bishops have been taking this taxpayer money. They're taking your money, millions, billions of dollars at this point. They're taking your money, American taxpayer, and they are using it for anti-American things. This needs to stop. So we're going to have this press conference. We're going to put it all out there. And then obviously the press, people like CNN, CBS, ABC, the Associated Press, all these people are going to be able to have all of that information and distribute that to their people who are seeing it. So it's not just staying within the Catholic sphere, it's getting out elsewhere, and people can see this major issue. Obviously, this is a very expensive proposition because it's happening in Washington, D.C., which is crazy expensive as a city, and we're going to the National Press Club, which apparently is where all of these things happen, and whoever owns the National Press Club is clearly a very rich man, because it's an absolute fortune to get the National Press Club. It's very beautiful, it's very nice, it's where all these things happen, but it's an absolute fortune, and you got to send a bunch of people, and you got to produce a bunch of press kits, and you got to buy donuts for the guy with horns, and all of this costs money. So please do make a donation today to support this initiative specifically. There's a link right under this video. You can use it to make the donations. But yeah, absolutely very, very important to do this.
And one thing too that we're asking essentially is that the USCCB be defunded, because just as a reminder, we're not saying all the bishops of each diocese need to be defunded. What we're talking specifically about is the corporation that is known as the U.S. Conference of Catholic
There's
Bishops.
the interface with the government.
That is a
and all the money
corporation. It's kind of like a lobbying group that lobbies usually for leftist things, and that's what we're calling to be defunded, the USCCB, because as a reminder, your individual bishop has jurisdiction and authority over you in your diocese. You do not owe obedience to the USCCB. They do not have authority over you, spiritual authority. It's your individual bishop who does. So the USCCB itself, as a conference, like we said, usually lobbies for these more leftist-leaning things using taxpayer dollars. Immigration, by far, they get their biggest paycheck from the U.S. Almost 40% of the annual USCC budget comes from government taxpayer dollars for their migration services.
And Trump was starting to dry up that,
yes, he was.
faucet a bit, and they really,
Why they
you know how
hated
it's
him.
so funny, they say, oh, we can't say in politics, all political. Their first year Trump was in office, his first year, document after statement from the USCCB that he's doing this wrong, immigration's wrong. They just kept hammering him. They found their voice, their political voice. But you talk about God, you know, the anti-American policy. You talk about how America is the largest consumer of child trafficking and all this whole industry, sex industry. When you're turning a blind eye, when you're facilitating that with all this massive open border and all of that that's being ushered up in here, along with the drugs, the plague is, you know, what's the latest drug that hit the street? Fentanyl. All of that, and no one's even asking a question about any of that. Then you start to say, well, what's that doing to the moral integrity of America? And, you know, you say, God bless America. Well, he's like, I can't, because you're getting farther and farther away from anything that could be blessed. You're I hate to use the word, but, you know, the karma is just kind of an analogous way of saying it. But, you know, the scales are being tilted so far to the left on this, you know, area of justice and morality and that. And the bishops themselves are riding, you know, are on duty. You know, it's on their watch. And this whole moral decline, you talk about crime epidemic, and you're talking about the wave of child trafficking and the fentanyl, everything, and the destruction of the family and home. Where are the bishops? You know, they just keep glad-handing about some nonsensical thing about, well, we have to welcome all the poor. Well, yeah, but in the process, you're doing it in such a reckless way that you're endangering the moral and fabric of this country, in which God is having a harder and harder time to find, you know.
Yeah, see, I would. It's interesting because you talk about this, and both you and Christine have spoken of this as like a kind of a left-wing issue, and I would kind of want to say this isn't about a left-wing issue. This is an anti-American issue. Okay, time was you could have a left-wing politician who was actually like kind of really pro-America. You know, I mean, you can go back and there's these people there, and they're you know, and obviously, you know, I'm probably going to get, you know, called out in the comments for it and stuff. But people like Truman, people like Kennedy, okay, by far and away, not perfect people, grotesquely imperfect people, but so are we all. But you know what? They were not the modern left that we have. The modern left that we have now, I don't know that the old left would recognize them. Back in the day, the left was, my husband has died, for this purpose I'm a woman, my husband has died in the mine, and I have nothing to support, and the left is saying, okay, well, we will support you in that regard. The evil capitalist mill owner should be supporting you when your husband gets chewed up by his machine that isn't properly maintained. That was the original left. Now it's like, hey, bake my gay cake and respect my pronouns or I'll throw you in the gulag. Okay, that's where we've gone. The issue here is anti-American. There are certain fundamental Western civilization principles which come to their most perfect expression in America. Is it perfect? No, but it gets as close as it can. Issues such as justice for all, freedom of speech. These are fundamental principles of Western civilization, which the U.S. bishops are part of the problem that is deconstructing this high trust, low crime, non-discriminatory, meritocratic society that is Western civilization. They are deconstructing it. And that is the issue. It's not a question of are you left, are you right? Those are wholly separate concerns. Those are concerns of how should we administer our civilization, not shall we set fire to it and tear it down.
People forget that there was a time where a Catholic could arguably be a Democrat. That's the time that you were describing there. This strikes home with me. Looking back at my family history, I come from a long line of Catholic Democrats, but they were mostly concerned with the labor issues and things like that. Good, faithful people, believed in all the teachings of the church. And if my grandparents, my great-grandparents were to look, at the Democratic Party today, they would be unrecognizable, as you said. So it is possible, but I don't think anymore, as it's been famously saying, you can't be Catholic and be a Democrat. Looking at the party platform, not to mention all of the cultural stuff. But Brad, you mentioned the disturbing fact of the high demand of this, and Christine brought this up as well, that the U.S. is the greatest consumer of child sexual abuse material. And you could look at that just from a digital perspective, obviously. That's bad enough. Just a dude at his computer looking at that crap, not good at all. But then you have the situation where there's actually American citizens who want to physically act out on this, right? And this is part of what Ballard was fighting against. He was allowed, they established the program in the Homeland Security, where they could actually go beyond the U.S. borders and track U.S. citizens overseas who were going to those places where you could just go and buy children. And that's what Ballard was going undercover there. And I can only imagine how difficult it was for him to pose as a buyer of children. Think of the psychological stuff that does. And this has been going on. If you talk to experts on this demand for child sexual abuse material has been going up in the past decade or so. Just the past few years, they say it's increased exponentially. You can look at the destruction of culture and blame that. But at the same time, it's been going on for decades too. You talk about Americans going overseas and buying children for sexual purposes. My dad, who's a Navy vet, in the 1980s, he was overseas in various places. I forget where exactly he was at the time, but he tells the story of him, walking through a particular town and, talking about the sister issue. This is trying to sell my sister. He had a young boy approaching him trying to sell his sister to him. Wow. And this is in the 1980s. So it's been going on for a while. It's been a long time coming. And, thanks be to God that we have a movie like this finally shining a light.
What's interesting, too, is that the reason Operation Underground Railroad was founded was because when he was working with the federal government, there are very strict rules about jurisdiction. They passed the statute, as you mentioned, where no longer do you have to work within the confines of the United States. You actually go overseas and then arrest a U.S. citizen over there if he's caught committing a crime against children over there. But he, on another mission, wanted to start catching pedophiles who were not U.S. citizens, because many of them were not. Many of these traffickers who were trafficking children into the U.S. were not U.S. citizens. But he spoke with his boss, and the boss said, I'm sorry, we can't do anything. They're not U.S. citizens. We have no jurisdiction. I can't allow you to do this. So that is what inspired him to launch his own nonprofit. And what's interesting is he actually was about 12 weeks away from vesting his pension. And he forwent that in order to start this. And he calculated it. He said, I would have gotten about $12 million from my pension. And I gave all of that up with my wife. My wife agreed, because we were like, God wants us to do this. And then they started this. And now they have saved about 8,000 children so far.
Some real skin in the game.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us for today's episode of The Download. Now, please join us as we finish in prayer, begging Our Lady's intercession for our nation and our church. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Salve Regina.
Mater misericordiae, vita dulcedo et spes nostra salve. Ad te clamamus exules filii Eve. Ad te suspiramus gementes et flentes in hac lacrimarum vale. Ea ergo advocata nostra, ilos tuos misericordes oculos ad nos converte. Et Iesum benedictum fructum ventris tui, nobis post hoc exilium ostende. O clemens, o pia, o dulcis Virgo Maria. Amen.
In the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Thank you again for joining us for The Download. We premiere a new episode like this every weekday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. From all of us here at Church Militant, God bless you.